When I first signed up for Professor Grace Carter's literature class, I had no idea she'd make such an impression on me. She wasn't the typical professor. She was younger than most of the others, probably in her mid-30s, with a sharp wit and a magnetic personality that held the attention of the entire class. Her lectures were a blend of literature and life lessons, and I often found myself lingering after class, drawn in by her insights. But it wasn't just her knowledge that made me stay late that one particular afternoon. I'd been feeling a strain in my relationship with Emma, my girlfriend of 2 years. Things hadn't been the same lately. She was busy, always focused on her studies in a different department, and we barely had time to connect anymore. I felt like I was drifting, and somehow, talking to Professor Carter felt like a lifeline. That day, after the rest of the students had left, I approached her, hoping for advice. She looked up, her sharp blue eyes softening as I explained how lost I was feeling. Relationships can be tricky, she said, her voice calm and reassuring. Sometimes you have to work through rough patches, but sometimes maybe it's a sign to explore something new. Her words struck a chord. It wasn't exactly what I'd expected to hear, but there was something comforting in the way she looked at me, as if she truly understood. She offered to grab coffee with me to continue the conversation, and I accepted, grateful for someone who seemed to genuinely care. Sitting across from her in the small cafe, I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't with anyone in a long time. She listened intently, nodding in understanding, occasionally offering advice but mostly letting me speak. She shared stories from her own life too, about the mistakes she'd made in relationships, her loneliness despite her success, and her longing for something real. It was strange. She was my professor, and yet I felt a connection to her that went beyond the classroom. I'd never experienced anything like it before. "Thank you, Professor Carter," I said as we wrapped up, feeling a bit sheepish. "I didn't mean to dump all that on you." She smiled, reaching out to place a hand on mine, her touch warm and lingering. "Please call me Grace. And don't be so hard on yourself, Ryan. We all need someone to talk to." Her hand stayed on mine a moment too long, her gaze holding mine. There was a hint of something more, a spark I couldn't quite place. I pulled my hand back, a nervous chuckle escaping me, but Grace didn't seem fazed. She just smiled, as if she knew something I didn't. Over the next few weeks, I found myself spending more time with Grace. She was always there after class, ready with a friendly smile and open ears. Our conversations grew deeper, more personal, and the line between professor and student began to blur. I was caught between the familiarity of Emma and the thrill of something new, something forbidden. One evening, Grace invited me to her office, saying she had something special to show me. I hesitated but found myself agreeing, unable to resist the pull I felt toward her. When I entered, she was sitting on the edge of her desk, her expression warm and welcoming. "Ryan," she began softly, "I want you to know you're not alone. I see so much potential in you. You're thoughtful, kind, and brave for trusting me with everything you've shared." I felt a surge of emotions I couldn't control, a mixture of gratitude and something else. She stepped closer, her gaze locking onto mine, and before I knew it, we were standing inches apart, the air between us thick with tension. "Grace," I started, but the words caught in my throat. She reached up, her hand brushing my cheek, her touch sending a shiver down my spine. "You don't have to say anything, Ryan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. In that moment, I felt myself crossing a line I knew I shouldn't. But I couldn't pull back. I didn't want to. That night haunted me for days. I couldn't get Grace out of my mind. The way she'd looked at me, the soft, almost secretive smile that had lingered after our last encounter. She crossed the line, but I had to. I wanted to pretend it was nothing, just a slip in judgment. But the thrill of it wouldn't let me go. Emma noticed the change almost immediately. "You seem distracted, Ryan," she said one evening as we were studying together. She gave me a searching look, her dark eyes full of concern. "Is everything okay?" I wanted to tell her the truth, or at least some version of it, that I was just stressed about school, that maybe I'd taken on too much this semester. But I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I didn't want to hurt her, and I definitely didn't want to admit the truth to myself. "Yeah, just a lot going on," I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. Emma reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "I know things have been different lately," she said softly. "I miss us, Ryan." Her words hit me hard, stirring up guilt that I'd tried to bury. Here she was doing everything she could to make things work between us, and I was hiding something I could barely even understand. I promised myself I'd keep my distance from Grace, that I'd refocus on Emma and try to fix things. But the very next day, Grace asked me to stay after class. She waited until everyone else had filed out of the room before she approached, a knowing look in her eyes. "Ryan, I feel like we need to talk," she said softly, her tone gentle but insistent. I forced a nod, my heart pounding as I followed her into her office, wondering if she'd sense my resolve to stay away. But the moment she closed the door, all my promises to myself faded away. She was there, right in front of me, and the tension was undeniable. "Ryan, I know this is complicated," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." Her words wrapped around me, soothing and terrifying at the same time. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there frozen while she moved closer, her hand reaching out to touch mine. "I feel a connection with you that I can't ignore," she continued, her gaze intense. "I know it's wrong, but maybe some things are meant to happen." I felt her hand tighten around mine, her touch warm and inviting. I knew I should pull away, that I should end this before it went any further, but I couldn't. I was trapped, drawn to her in a way that made everything else fade into the background. That night, I left her office with a mixture of guilt and exhilaration, feeling like I was carrying a secret too big to hold. I tried to tell myself it was just a one-time thing, that I could go back to normal, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Over the next few weeks, our meetings became more frequent, more intense. Grace would call or text, inviting me to meet her in secluded spots on campus, away from prying eyes. Every encounter left me feeling more conflicted, torn between my loyalty to Emma and the thrill of my connection with Grace. But it wasn't long before Grace's demeanor began to shift. At first, it was subtle, little comments about how much she enjoyed spending time with me, how she wished we didn't have to hide. But then, one evening, as we sat alone in her office, she reached over, placing a hand on my shoulder, her gaze serious. "Ryan, I can't keep doing this in secret," she said quietly, her voice laced with a hint of frustration. I care about you. I don't want to share you with anyone else." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was asking me to choose, her or Emma. The realization sent a wave of panic through me, and I looked away, unable to meet her gaze. I don't know, Grace," I stammered. "Emma, she's been with me through so much. I can't just—" Grace's hand tightened on my shoulder, and when I looked up, I saw a flash of something dark in her eyes. "Ryan, I don't think you understand," she said, her voice soft but steely. "I can't be kept in the shadows. If you're serious about me, if you feel the way I feel, you need to let her go." A cold knot of fear settled in my stomach. Grace was no longer the comforting mentor I'd first met. She was someone who wanted control, who wanted all of me, no matter the cost. "I need time to think," I muttered, pulling away from her touch. This is a lot." Her expression softened, but I could still see the tension in her gaze. "Just remember, Ryan," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "If you're not with me, then we can't keep pretending this never happened." The implication was clear. She had the power to expose everything, to ruin my reputation, and put my academic future in jeopardy. And just like that, the thrill of our connection was replaced with fear. I left her office that night, my mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Grace was no longer a comforting confidant. She was a threat, a danger that could destroy everything I'd worked for. But the worst part? A part of me still wanted her. The next few days were like walking through a nightmare. Grace's demand echoed in my mind, her words taking on a sharper edge every time I thought of them. I was trapped. I knew she had the power to ruin my life if she wanted to, and I wasn't sure how far she'd go to keep me under her control. Emma noticed the change immediately. She'd been understanding, giving me space and support, but now she seemed worried. "Ryan, I feel like you're slipping away," she said one night, her voice small and strained. "It's like I don't even know you anymore." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to explain why I was so distant, why I couldn't be the boyfriend she needed right now. But how could I? How could I tell her that I'd let myself fall for someone else, that I'd become entangled in something I couldn't escape? It's just school stuff, I lied, my voice barely a whisper. I'm just dealing with a lot. Emma reached out, touching my hand. Ryan, I love you. Whatever it is, we can work through it. Together. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. Here she was, offering me forgiveness for something she didn't even know about. And here I was, hiding everything, too afraid to let her see the truth. I felt a surge of guilt, and in that moment, I knew I had to end things with Grace. It was wrong, it was dangerous, and it was eating me alive. But as much as I wanted to believe I could just walk away, I knew Grace wouldn't make it that easy. The next day, I gathered all my resolve and went to see Grace. I found her alone in her office, reviewing some papers, a small smile tugging at her lips when she saw me. Ryan, she greeted, her tone soft and inviting. I was wondering when you'd stop by. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. Grace, we need to talk. Whatever this is, it has to end. Her smile faded, her gaze narrowing slightly. What are you talking about? This relationship, I said, struggling to keep my voice from wavering. It's too much. I have a girlfriend, Grace. This isn't right. She stood up, folding her arms, a coldness settling over her features. So, that's it? You're just going to walk away? Pretend none of this ever happened? I nodded, forcing myself to stay firm. It was a mistake. I'm sorry. Grace's eyes darkened, her jaw tightening. A mistake, she echoed, her voice low and dangerous. Is that all I am to you? I could feel the anger radiating off her, but I couldn't back down now. I'd made my choice. Please, Grace. I don't want this to get ugly. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Ugly? Oh, Ryan, I think you underestimate how ugly things can get. Her words hung in the air, a clear threat. I felt a wave of panic rise within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Are you threatening me? Grace's lips curled into a cold smile. I don't make threats, Ryan. I make promises. And I promise you, if you try to walk away from me, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. Your professors, your friends, Emma, they'll all know who you really are. My heart pounded as her words sunk in. She was willing to go that far, to destroy everything I'd worked for just to keep me under her control. Grace, please, I said, my voice barely a whisper. This doesn't have to end like this. She tilted her head, a mocking smile playing on her lips. Then don't let it end, Ryan. You and I were meant to be together. You feel it, don't you? I looked away, unable to bear the intensity of her gaze. I don't know what I feel. Grace reached out, placing a hand on my cheek, her touch gentle but possessive. Then let me show you. You don't have to fight this, Ryan. Just give in. I stood there, torn between the fear of losing everything and the twisted attraction that still lingered. But deep down, I knew I couldn't let her control me any longer. I'm done, Grace, I said, stepping back. You can do whatever you want, but I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of rage crossing her face. Fine, she hissed. But don't say I didn't warn you. I turned and left her office, my heart pounding as I walked away, knowing I'd just declared war. The days that followed felt like walking through a minefield. Every time I turned a corner on campus, I expected to see Grace, her eyes burning with that mix of rage and betrayal. She hadn't contacted me since I walked out of her office, but I knew she wasn't finished. She'd made it clear there would be consequences. At first, I tried to pretend that everything was fine. I focused on my classes, spent time with Emma, and did my best to push Grace out of my mind. But there was a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that she was lurking somewhere in the background, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One evening, as I was studying with Emma, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, and sure enough, it was Grace. I warned you, Ryan. I'm not someone you can just walk away from. I stared at the message, my mind racing. She was serious. I'd hoped she was just bluffing, but now it was clear she intended to follow through with her threats. Another message appeared before I could respond. If you don't want your little girlfriend to find out about us, I suggest you reconsider. Panic surged through me. Grace was willing to go that far, to drag Emma into this, to destroy everything I cared about just to get what she wanted. My hands trembled as I typed a response, trying to sound as calm as possible. Please, Grace. Let's be reasonable. We don't need to involve anyone else in this. Her reply came almost instantly. Then meet me tomorrow evening. You know where? The next evening, I made my way to the quiet, deserted cafe where we'd first met outside of class. I'd chosen a table in the back corner, my heart pounding as I waited. Part of me wanted to run, to cut all ties and disappear, but I knew that wasn't possible. Grace had the power to ruin my life, and I was backed into a corner. She arrived a few minutes later, slipping into the seat across from me, her expression calm, but her eyes cold. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. So, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Do you understand now, Ryan? I don't take betrayal lightly." I swallowed hard, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Grace, please. I'm sorry for everything. But this has to stop." She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "I don't think you get to decide that." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to hold her gaze. "You can't control me, Grace. I don't want to be with you. This whatever we had, it's over." Her face hardened, a flicker of anger crossing her features. "Is that so?" she murmured, her tone icy. "Well, maybe I should pay a visit to Emma. I'm sure she'd be very interested in hearing about her loyal boyfriend's extracurricular activities." "Leave her out of this," I snapped, my voice shaking. "She's done nothing wrong." Grace raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. "Then give me a reason to stay quiet." I felt trapped, the walls closing in around me. She was twisting the knife, taking pleasure in my helplessness. I wanted to fight back, to stand up to her, but I knew that any move I made could end with her destroying everything. "Grace, I don't know what you want from me," I said, barely holding back the desperation in my voice. She leaned back, folding her arms as she studied me. "What I want, Ryan, is for you to remember your place. You don't get to walk away from me. You're mine." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She wasn't going to let me go, not without a fight. I left the cafe that night, my mind reeling. Grace had made her intentions clear. She wasn't going to back down, and she was willing to do whatever it took to keep me under her control. My options were dwindling, and the thought of Emma finding out the truth was more than I could bear. The next few days were a blur of fear and tension. Grace sent me texts constantly, reminders of her power over me, veiled threats about what would happen if I didn't comply. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, paranoid that she might appear at any moment, ready to ruin everything. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I knew I had to tell Emma something. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to prepare her for what might come. One evening, as we sat in my apartment, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to look her in the eye. "Emma," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." She looked up, her expression worried. "What is it, Ryan?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the nightmare that had consumed me, but I knew that was impossible now. "There's someone," I said, my voice trembling. "Someone who's trying to make things difficult for me." Emma's brow furrowed, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I struggled to find the right words, feeling the weight of my guilt pressing down on me. She's a professor, and we got close. Too close. But now, she won't leave me alone." Emma's eyes widened, shock and hurt flashing across her face. "Are you telling me you cheated on me?" The raw pain in her voice was like a dagger to my heart. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I knew that was impossible now. I had broken her trust, shattered the foundation of our relationship, and there was no way to fix it. "I'm sorry, Emma," I whispered, my voice choked with regret. "I never meant for any of this to happen." She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. "How could you do this, Ryan? How could you lie to me like that?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. There was nothing I could say to make this right. Emma left that night, and I knew she wouldn't be back. I had lost her, driven her away with my own mistakes and selfishness. And now I was truly alone. Grace had won. The days after Emma left were a blur. My classes, my apartment, even the campus felt different now. Darker, lonelier. I was no longer the person I'd been just a few months ago. Grace had seen to that. She'd taken something from me, something I could never get back. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake her shadow from my life. Grace, of course, was relentless. With Emma gone, she seemed emboldened, more confident. She'd send messages late at night, ask me to meet her just to talk. She acted as though nothing had happened, as though everything was normal between us. One night, I finally replied, "Grace, stop contacting me. I don't want anything to do with you. I'm done." Her response was almost immediate. "Oh, Ryan, you should know by now it's not that simple." The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was short, written in her neat handwriting. "Meet me tonight. This ends when I say it does." I knew she wouldn't stop. Grace had made it clear that she had nothing to lose. But maybe I had one final chance to end this, once and for all. That evening, I went to her office. She was waiting for me, her expression cool and composed. She didn't speak right away, just watched me as I entered, closing the door behind me. "So," she began, folding her arms, "you finally decided to listen. I'm here to tell you to leave me alone, Grace," I said, my voice steady but cold. Whatever this was, it's over." She raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Is it? Do you really think you could just walk away?" "Yes," I replied, meeting her gaze. "Because if you don't stop, I'll tell the administration everything." For the first time, her expression faltered. I could see a flash of doubt in her eyes, and I pressed on, hoping to exploit her fear. "Think about it, Grace," I continued, keeping my tone firm. "If I go to the administration, you'll lose everything. Your job, your reputation, your whole career. Is that really what you want?" She stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and fear. I could see her mind racing, weighing her options. But instead of backing down, her face hardened, a look of cold resolve settling over her features. "You think you're the first student who's tried to fight me?" She sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing, Ryan. Just another boy who thought he could handle a woman like me." I felt a surge of anger rise within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Maybe, but this time, you've pushed too far." Her smile faltered, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew I was serious, that I wasn't going to let her control me any longer. "Fine," she hissed, her voice filled with venom. "Go ahead, tell them. But don't expect me to go down quietly." I held her gaze for a long moment, my heart pounding. Then, without another word, I turned and walked out of her office, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. It was finally over. The next few weeks were tense. I kept expecting Grace to retaliate, to try something, anything, to pull me back into her twisted world. But she didn't. I heard rumors that she'd taken a leave of absence, that she was dealing with personal issues, but I didn't dare ask for details. All I knew was that she was gone, and for the first time in months, I felt free. I never saw Emma again. I thought about reaching out, about trying to explain, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. I'd hurt her too deeply, betrayed her trust beyond repair. Some mistakes couldn't be undone, but in a strange way, the experience changed me. I'd faced something dark and twisted, something that had nearly destroyed me. And while I was left with scars, I knew I'd come out stronger. Grace had tried to control me, to make me doubt myself. But in the end, I'd found the strength to stand up to her, to reclaim my own life. And that, I realized, was the only victory that mattered.